Hi, my name is Veronica, and I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of our thoughts creating our reality. What I want to share with you is some information that is showing you the structure, let's say, of why things aren't necessarily as straightforward as our thoughts creating our reality. One of the things that has presented itself to me over time is this idea that our thoughts are creating our reality. In the sense that I was raised metaphysically, and so at a very young age, I was taught to visualize, I was taught to manifest, I was taught to have, these ideas and these pictures so that I can really more or less create a beautiful world, let's say, for myself. What's interesting is that as I've, aged and as I've gone through life, of course, I've had my ups and downs, and I've seen lots of things happen that aren't specific to that rule. So in other words, when we hear a rule, let's say it's a spiritual law, what you think about, you bring about, or on the contrary, what you resist persists, right? And at the same time, there is this other reality where we will see that these specific so-called spiritual laws don't seem to be as blanket across the board as maybe we would think they should be. So, for example, there are a lot of people who have these hard-lined, let's say, religious views that if you do this, then you will go to hell, let's say, or if you do this, then you will go to heaven. And the thing is, in the afterlife, let's say after we've passed away, we honestly don't know, let's say, where people have gone. So it's much easier, let's say, to have that structure, warning people, oh, if you do this, here are the consequences. Either you're going to end up in this place or this place. And since there's no one coming back from, let's say, heaven or hell to say, here's where I've been because of my experiences, of course, maybe they are, but anyway, we don't have the evidence to show otherwise. So what I've found, however, is that when we hear things like our thoughts create our reality, we will often see that that's not necessarily true. So I'd like to give a few examples. One of which is I absolutely, admire my father-in-law. He's a wonderful man, and he has since passed away. And he has spent many of his years, concerned about crime. He was watching the news daily, and he even got to a point where he was almost concerned about, having his doors locked all the time, screens locked, things like that. So there was really this sense of something bad was going to happen or could happen or should happen. And so what I saw was this thinking, and it was jokingly a family kind of like, oh, grandpa is saying this again, and watch out for the crazies, or whatever he might have said. So this is not meant to be disrespectful in any way. I just want to offer this up as an example. And yet he lived a perfectly harmless life. Nothing ever came to him, no harm. There was never a home invasion. There was never any issue. All the crime that was on the television telling him to watch out for this and watch out for that, maybe he prevented it because he did all these, precautionary types of things. However, what I saw was this consistent, train of thought of, the world is really bad, it's really frightening, you have to watch out, there were crazies out there. And nothing ever came to it, to him in that regard. And then I'm sure you know of people who have lived very, I will use the word, higher consciousness lives. Let's say they have spent time meditating, or they have spent time being aware of their thoughts. They have tried very hard to create, let's say, something that they want. And what ends up happening, let's say, is that they aren't necessarily living this easy life, that they haven't experienced what I would call grace and ease consistently in terms of what comes to them. So, and we all know probably these similar stories. So it's much harder when we are told that our thoughts create our reality and that we need to try to monitor them if we're not seeing the evidence. So what I'd like to offer is a little bit of a different perspective. So this idea of our thoughts creating our reality is a partial truth. For example, what I see working with people is we have different levels of consciousness. So for those of us who are, more awake, let's say, we are often experiencing a life that has slightly more, I'm going to use the word challenges, because there are higher lessons to be learned within these challenges, let's say. So if your life purpose, for example, is to, raise your family, to live very simply, to earn the money that needs to be earned to support your family, and you do everything, just so, then maybe you would be, let's say in the luck of the draw, having what most people would call a good life. And at the same time, there are those people who could create that same dynamic and have a very similar story and not necessarily get their perfect little life the way that they may have thought they wanted it to be. So the first part is this sense that we are all coming in with different agendas or different intentions from a soul level in terms of what we want to learn. And then the other is that if we see our thoughts as a piece of the mind, a piece of the ego, and that the ego is something that is created with thought patterns. And what I'd like to say in this respect is that this thought pattern is a connection of these thoughts that create an energy blanket, okay? And what happens is there is an empty space, right? And then there's another thought. For those who are working in the higher realms of consciousness, let's say they have come in a little bit more awake, they are spending more time in this space between thoughts, in this sort of void space. In other words, because their awareness and their intention and attention is more in the so-called void, the thought process isn't quite as powerful. I don't mean that exactly that way, but that's sort of the energy imprint that I'm trying to convey here. So, for example, if what you are experiencing is to be in this empty space between the thought process, then it's much harder to have a hard form rule. In other words, you've left the realm of what we would call spiritual laws. And I don't mean to say that there aren't spiritual energy intentions or forms, but this idea that there are actual laws is still not completely accurate. So for example, on Earth we have gravity. That is a law. And yet, randomly someone might fall out of a plane with all this intense gravity, hit the ground, their parachute didn't open, and sure, maybe every bone has been broken, but they survive. Whereas somebody can fall off a 6-foot ladder and then, a freak of nature happens where they snap something and they don't survive. So it really is sort of this what are we here for? The reason I'm offering this is that if you have been experiencing this kickback, let's say, of your thoughts are your reality and things aren't working, and you feel as if your thoughts are as pious or as good or as in integrity as they can be, and you're not understanding, then what you're really experiencing is being in that in-between space. So what I'm offering is to allow yourself to be in the in-between space. Those of us who are waking up to this newer way of being are trying to release the structure of the thought form only. In other words, if our thoughts are creating our reality and we go back to monitoring and, trying to have new thoughts, we are giving the thought, the ego, the mind, our power. What we are trying to do instead is to be in that empty space in which the energy field is just flowing and moving, and we can release this idea of thoughts form. One last piece is that when we are manifesting, when we are looking at this idea of manifesting, for example, what will happen is we will try to have a thought. We will try to hold that thought, and then we will try to talk ourselves into believing in that thought. right? And so we're really trying to get back on that train of the 3D structure. And again, it often comes from an egoic sense. So what I invite you to do is experience and experiment with this place in between the thoughts, to be in the void, to be in the emptiness, to be in this possibility. And just see what unfolds. And with that, all is truly well, and I now gratefully acknowledge spending time with you in this space between thoughts. Thank you.